Naomi Torres grew up in a small town outside of Houston. Daughter of a nurse and a mechanic, she learned to fix what was broken and to keep quiet when people expected her to. She had a knack for numbers, not the flashy kind, but the quiet, stubborn kind that solves problems you didn't even know you had. Solistech was the kind of company that smelled like ambition and coffee. Offices glassed in, slogans on the walls. Naomi joined as an operations analyst, the person behind dashboards that told executives where the money was going. She was precise, careful, the kind of employee who noticed when a payment didn't line up, when a vendor invoice looked off. 2 years in, Naomi did the thing everyone told her not to. She applied for the promotion to senior ops. She had the metrics, the improvements, the late nights logged. She believed in the quiet accumulation of work. When she hit send, a few colleagues smiled politely. Claire Bennett, polished, glossy, the company's public favorite, raised an eyebrow and laughed with others. Cute, Claire mouthed, and the laugh spread like a ripple. A week later, the promotion went to Claire. The office clapped, the kind of applause you give a scripted actor. Naomi kept working, smiling at her screen, and then the email came, a formal notice from HR about irregularities in vendor reconciliation linked to her account. The message was clinical. The subtext was devastating. She was suspected of mishandling funds. They did not fire Naomi outright. That would be messy. They reassigned her to a different team, a demotion dressed in suits. The laughter didn't stop, it simmered as a knowing glance. Naomi could have left quietly, but something inside refused to let her be the scapegoat. She kept a copy of her own logs. She asked for the receipts. She got stonewalled. Naomi found an anomaly. A vendor payment was routed through a shell company, an invoice with a name she didn't recognize, an account number that didn't match any vendor in the system. The payment came from a budget line she had access to. She printed the ledger. In the margins, she made notes. That margin note is what kept her from walking away. Naomi found an anomaly. A vendor payment was routed through a shell company, an invoice with a name she didn't recognize, an account number that didn't match any vendor in the system. The payment came from a budget line she had access to. She printed the ledger. In the margins, she made notes. That margin note is what kept her from walking away. In the weeks that followed, Naomi reached out quietly to one person she thought she could trust, Jonah Reyes. Jonah had been let go 6 months earlier, an awkward hacker-adjacent analyst who'd once saved them from a meltdown and was fired under mysterious circumstances. He owed Naomi a favor. He brought skills Naomi needed, access to discarded logs, an ability to read between digital lines. Together, Naomi and Jonah started building a case. They reconstructed timestamps, cross-checked invoice hashes, traced payouts. It was painstaking, an extra zero here, a shifted account number there. Patterns emerged, payments to a small company, Marwood Consultancy, that didn't have an office, only a P.O. box. The money flowed from Solistech's vendor pool through Marwood and out.
As Naomi dug, whispers followed. Claire started to avoid Naomi's eyes. She smiled in corridors but had a coldness underneath. Then Naomi discovered an exchange, a forwarded email, falsified signatures, and a note referencing Naomi's login. Someone had used her credentials to approve transactions, someone with access and motivation. Naomi confronted Claire, expecting anger, explanation, anything. Claire's voice was small. "I didn't do it, Naomi," she said. But Naomi could tell she was lying. The company's internal audit closed the issue quickly, too quickly. Reports landed on desks with neat conclusions. User error, sloppy accounting. Naomi was put on administrative leave pending final review. The office talk turned cruel. Social media rumors spread. Naomi's life narrowed to a list of denials and requests for access she was denied.
Naomi's one public option was truth. Jonah recommended an investigative reporter he trusted, Malik Ortega, host of a small but respected podcast that dug into corporate malfeasance. Malik agreed to meet after hearing a quick summary. He didn't promise to run the story. He asked for proof. Naomi and Jonah handed him the first batch, ledger anomalies, matching bank transfers, suspicious vendor IPs. Malik published a soft piece, a 12-minute podcast episode that asked questions without naming names. The story went quiet at first, but then an influential investor retweeted it. Pressure mounted. Solistech's PR issued a canned statement, "We take concerns seriously." Naomi watched from the sidelines, the narrative shifting in her favor, slightly. Naomi needed proof that tied a human hand to the fraud. Jonah suggested a trap, a controlled invoice, a seeded test designed to be routed only by someone with the power to override standard checks. They created an innocuous small test payment labeled Project Rebuild, Vendora, and watched. 2 days later, the payment cleared. The logs showed Claire's manager approving it after hours. Naomi felt a sick clarity. Claire was the approving hand, or so the trail seemed to read. At this point Naomi had a choice: expose Claire and get her job back, or push further and find who ordered the manipulation. Jonah wanted a quick strike: reveal Claire, win the public. Naomi hesitated. She remembered an old classroom phrase: solve the problem, not the symptom. She suspected someone higher up, someone who used Claire as a hand. Naomi widened the net. She requested external bank routing data through Malik's legal contacts. She worked late, slept at her office a few nights. Quietly, she found patterns in the fingerprinting of the approving device, a thumbprint, a specific company laptop. The laptop was issued to Richard Halden, the VP who'd backed Claire publicly. Motive appeared: Halden controlled project budgets and had been using shell vendors to skim. Naomi felt relief and dread at the same time. Proof of corruption meant danger. Naomi confronted Richard in a meeting arranged under the pretense of mediation. She arrived with her documents and Jonah recorded discreetly. Richard smiled, that confident, practiced smile. He deflected, joked about mistakes, then leaned forward. "You were playing a dangerous game," he said softly. Naomi presented the data, timelines, shell companies, and the laptop fingerprint. The room froze. Claire sat near the door, face ashen. Then the twist hit. Richard didn't deny the transactions. Instead, he pointed to Claire and said, "She's been cooking the books for months. We had to move fast." Claire's eyes rolled wide with betrayal. But as Jonah's recording later revealed, Claire's explanation was too polished. Something still didn't fit. Piece by piece, Naomi and Jonah pulled the truth. Claire had indeed touched the invoices, but not out of pure greed. She had been threatened. Richard had been coercing her, threaten her family's contractor business, threaten exposure of something from her past. Claire had been the visible hand because someone else, someone with legal and financial muscle, had been pulling strings. And that someone was connected to Evan Morales, the investor whose friendly emails Naomi had once admired. Claire, broken, called Naomi in private. In a small, unscripted moment, Claire admitted she'd been coerced. She offered a small lead, a photograph of a meeting where Richard and a third man, an outside counsel tied to Evan's firm, were present. Naomi realized exposing Claire alone would only be a speed bump. To topple the whole thing she needed to go public with a chain of proof that tied money, meetings and motive. Naomi, Jonah and Malik set a plan, a two-phase exposure. Phase 1. Leak a precise dossier to Malik's podcast that included enough detail to force an independent audit and board action. Phase 2. Release a video and documents to a coalition of journalists and a federal whistleblower hotline if the board stalled. They planned to livestream the key moments to decentralize the narrative. On the day of the board meeting, Naomi walked into a room filled with people who'd once laughed at her. The board called for transparency. Malik's podcast had already made waves. The SEC had sent a request for records. Naomi asked to speak. Her voice was steady as she walked the room through the chain: shell vendors, routing traces, fingerprinted approvals. She laid out Claire's coerced complicity and Richard's central role. She played the recording Jonah had made. The room reacted, some with shock, some with anger, many with fear. Then came the final twist. Evan Morales, present in the boardroom as a voice of calm, stood and offered a public show of support for Naomi. He called for Richard to step down pending investigation and praised the company's resilience. The room breathed easier. But later that night, Naomi discovered an email thread Evan had not expected her to find: payments routed through an offshore trust tied to the same shell vendors. Evan had been laundering influence. He was not the savior he pretended. Exposing him would mean dragging a public investor into the mud. It would also mean endangering the legal case if poorly timed. Naomi now had a choice: pursue the small victory of Richard and Claire, or go after the whole network, including a powerful investor. Naomi chose the long road. She coordinated with Malik and a group of journalists, lawyers and a whistleblower's attorney. They prepared a carefully timed public release that included legal affidavits and encrypted backups. Claire agreed to testify, provided protections were in place. Jonah prepared the final pieces of the digital chain. They took steps to protect families, to secure bank records and to publish in a way that could not be snuffed out. The morning the dossier dropped felt like the world tilted. News outlets ran the narrative: Solace Tech under investigation, VP accused, investor implicated. The stock dipped. Protesters appeared outside the headquarters. The board placed Richard on leave. Claire's cooperation was headline news. Evan issued a denial, but markets smelled blood. For Naomi, vindication arrived in a messy, public way: interviews, threats, praise. Some people called her reckless. Others called her brave. Exposure didn't erase the months of humiliation. Naomi received hateful messages. Her parents were questioned about her integrity. Claire's family faced threats. Jonah got offers to disappear. Naomi found herself in the eye of a storm she'd summoned. But she also watched the SEC open a full probe, saw arrests of shell company front men, and learned that Claire's contractor business was freed from extortion. The truth was messy, full of collateral damage, but real. A year later, Solace Tech's board replaced several executives and installed new compliance oversight. Naomi was offered a settlement and an opportunity, a leadership role to help build the very checks that had been absent. She refused the quick offer to return to old life. Instead, she founded a nonprofit that aided corporate whistleblowers and offered pro bono forensic audits for small nonprofits vulnerable to the same shell company schemes. People remembered dramatic returns, the boardroom speech, the viral podcast. But Naomi's true victory was quieter, a life rebuilt on a set of choices she refused to let others define. She had been mocked for applying, for daring to want more. In the end, she did not just take back what was hers. She used it to change the system that had tried to break her. If you're watching this and you've been sidelined, remember, evidence, persistence and allies can move mountains. And if you work in a place where someone is trying to silence you, find the people who will listen. The truth rarely moves fast, but it has a way of finding daylight.